ancestor, which might have been something like bacteria. We know the process by which that came about. We don't know the details, but we understand essentially how it came about.
We now know the process by which a bacteria transmuted into a bunch of different species. Really? Come on, dude. Nobody knows that process because there's no observational data of anything like that, right? There is mutations within a species to fit the environment, but nothing anywhere close to one species mutating into something else. And they always pass off the micro level adaptations as if, well, if they just had enough time, then a mouse's fur turning darker and longer would become a rat, would become a monkey, would become a dolphin. If you just give it enough time, dude. Trust me. It's freaking magic, man. Just trust me. Just wait. Have we observed millions of years of this occurring? No, but it would, just trust me, it would. We now know this. See, we now know.
There are still gaps in our understanding. We don't understand how the cosmos came into existence in the first place, but we're working on
that. Just trust us. We don't have all the answers, but if you just have some faith in the scientific process, bro, we're working on it. I can't believe you just said that. We're working on it. I mean, imagine as a theist if I said, I don't have answers to every area of my theology. There's gaps, which is the case. But if you want an answer to all the theological problems, we're working on it. Could you imagine me saying that? Atheists would be like, oh, got you, dude. We got it, bro. We got it. He screwed up, dude. It's over. Retire. You're done. You're canceled. You're done. Come on, man. Really?
Scientific enterprise is an active seeking out of gaps in our knowledge, seeking out of ignorance so that we can work to plug that ignorance. But religion teaches us to be satisfied with not really understanding every one of these difficult questions that comes up.
But it doesn't, though. That's the point, right? I mean, it gives us a totality paradigm within which science actually makes sense. The problem of induction, right? How do I know the future will be like the past? Well, if the world is designed in a providential way by which God makes sure that the seasons follow one another and that tomorrow will be like the past, then it makes sense why there is the principle of induction, which undergirds all science. If the universe is pure chaos, there's not actually a basis for induction. That's Hume's whole point. I might hope that it's the same, but I don't actually have a reason to believe in the principle of induction, which undergirds all science.
Science says, right, let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Religion says, oh, God did it.
Yeah, but that's not what theology says, right? Theology makes place for human beings as secondary causal agents, right? We don't just say, oh, God did it, God did it, God did it. God doesn't do everything. Humans do things too, right? So this reducing everything to as if we said that God causes everything and everything is explained by God is a way oversimplified approach to what theology actually says. And it's not true, right?
Need to work on it. God did it. It's as simple as that.
But who says this? Have you ever heard anybody in the domain of theology say, we don't need to do anything because God did it. You don't need to understand anything because God did it. I've never heard anybody say this. What is he talking about?
Thrusting.
I would say that's a ad hominem, right? Or that's a straw man, because I literally can't. I'm trying to think of even like the worst apologist or Christian proponent, theist proponent. I can't remember anybody saying something like, don't study anything because God did it.
Force, pushing.
And blind faith can be very dangerous, especially if it's coupled with a blind obedience to an evil authority.
Well, I think this is kind of true, right? I mean, I guess this is another point that should have been addressed, is that Dawkins' argumentation assumes that all theology basically functions like a backwoods snake handling cult, right? Like, you don't ask any questions, you just merely submit to authority. But he, again, had just said that the whole endeavor of science comes out of Christian universities. So it just doesn't make any sense. But this should be addressed, right? That we should not set faith or theology over against the domain of reason. And of course, most Christians, I think, whether Catholic or Orthodox, agree with this basic idea. I would go even further to say that actually reason itself presupposes faith, right? That's the even stronger, that's the nuclear level apologetics that we do based on transcendental argumentation. Again, is the proposition faith is not contradictory to reason true? Yeah, sure. But I will make an even stronger argument that reasoning itself presupposes faith. And even the position of somebody like Dawkins presupposes a kind of faith. Didn't you hear him say, we may not have all the answers, but just trust us, we're working on it. That's what he said. That's a faith-based proposition. That's have faith in science, man. Trust the science. What has the cult of scientism said the last 2 years? Trust the science, bro. Trust the science. Trust the science? That's a faith-based proposition. Come on, man.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize, is true whether the blind faith is that of religious or secular people.
Yes, thank you. Good point.
But not
secularism is a religious commitment. Yes, this is so obvious, so true. It's demonstrable. You can philosophically and logically demonstrate this with formal certitude and objectivity. And it's so obvious, it's hilarious, that the atheist will double down and try to act like it's not. The limitations of science do not grant you the ability to make grand narrative worldview claims about the origins of life and meaning and all the stuff that they do all the time, going out of the bounds of the strict limitations of empirical sense data. And they're doing a bait and switch, right? They're like, I only follow the science and the data. I only follow what rationality, logic tells me. And then they make these vast claims that go way beyond sense data. They make claims contradictory to sense data. And they can't even give an account for how sense data is meaningful.
But what is beyond science is not necessarily irrational. Science cannot tell us, for instance, whether a poem, a work of literature, or a work of art or music is good or beautiful. Science can tell us that if you put strychnine into your grandmother's tea, it will kill her. But science cannot tell you whether it's morally right to do so.
This is a good point, just reiterating what we saw last week when we analyzed the Jordan Peterson-Sam Harris conversation about is ought. So I like that Lennox has immediately brought up the is ought problem, that you can never get normative ethical claims or standards by reporting what is the case, right? And that's an argument that Hume brought up a long time ago. The fact that this is the case does not tell you whether it ought to be the case. It's a very simple point. The atheists just constantly ignore it, right? We saw Sam Harris talking in crazy circles, trying to point out that, no, you can get an ought from an is, and it went absolutely nowhere, right? There's a great discussion, too, if you've not seen, I'm not advocating this person and his philosophy, I don't know what he teaches, but there's a 20-minute discussion between Sean Carroll and Sam Harris from 3 years ago on YouTube, and he's enough of a philosopher and knows enough epistemology that he just basically makes Sam Harris look like an idiot in 20 minutes, right? And I'm only saying that because Sam Harris has made no progress in this question from 3 years ago to Jordan Peterson bringing it up to him again the other day. So in the last 3 years, Sam Harris has made zero progress, literally states the exact same garbage nonsense that he said 3 years ago to Sean Carroll, which maybe we'll listen to that in another stream or something. But it's funny. Like it's like, you know, it's not very hard to illustrate the logical problem here, Sam, in 5 different ways to you, and you still can't get it.
The Nobel Prize winner, Sir Peter Medawar, who's quite a hero, I think, for both of us, has pointed out that you can easily see the limits of science because it cannot answer the elementary questions of a child. Who am I? What is the purpose of my existence? Where am I going? Now, Richard has just contrasted science and religion, religion being content with not understanding, whereas science is unraveling the understanding of the universe. And I understand and feel the force of that objection very strongly, because sometimes Christians, I admit, have been guilty of a lazy God of the gaps kind of solution. I can't understand it, therefore God did it. And of course, God disappears as the gaps close. But I'd like to point out that there are two kinds of gap, ladies and gentlemen. There are gaps that science closes, and I call those the bad gaps. But there are also gaps that science opens, and we may come to some of those later. But as for the idea itself, Richard referred to the very important fact that science, modern science as we know it, exploded in the 16th and 17th centuries, and it arose out of a theistic background.
Yeah, this was my point, so I'm glad he's catching on to this.
Philosophers of science have studied this and come to the conclusion that's now called Whitehead's thesis, that human beings became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver.
Oh, there you go.
I think that is
that's what I just said. So, yeah, isn't that obvious that the reason that science would even be possible is that we live in a meaningful universe with regularity? Duh.
Important because it means, far from religion hindering science, it was the driving force behind the rise of science in the first place. And when Isaac Newton, for example, discovered his law of gravity and wrote down the equations of motion, he didn't say, marvelous, I now understand it, I've got a mechanism, therefore I don't need God. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was because he understood the complexity and sophistication of the mathematical description of the universe that his praise for God was increased.
I think that, people who have a more mathematical bent and that are more abstract in their thinking, they're much more able to grasp, not always, but maybe they're kind of situated to where it's easier for them to get transcendental argumentation. I don't know that that's where Lennox is going, but his thought process in terms of how he's responding to Dawkins is how I would respond, right? These are the thought processes that I had, as you heard before, because as you guys know, I've not heard this debate. I don't know what his arguments are. All I know is that he's a mathematician. And so I think that mathematics is, because it's a higher order of pattern recognition and thinking, they're able to see the domain in which divine conceptualism, the logi, transcendental argumentation, why that's much more obvious or a better approach, or that reality clearly points us to that, right? As opposed to the solid 5 cents data, here in the now, evolution, no meaning over time, this kind of the being trapped in the here and the now, the immediate sense data approach that Dawkins has boxed himself into, you see. So, and that doesn't mean that, math is therefore like self-evident. Math is like better than material existence and we need to be Gnostics and try to become Platonists or whatever. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that being able to make higher order pattern recognition comparisons, classifications, I think kind of gives people a one-up or a better an upper hand when it comes to arguing and debating these points. They're able to systematize and question even at a more fundamental level than the people that are stuck in this very kind of basic bitch level empiricism.
I would like to suggest, Richard, that somewhere down in this you're making a category mistake because you're confusing mechanism with agency. We have a mechanism, it does X, Y, and Z, therefore there's no need for an agent. I would suggest that the sophisticated